The loudspeaker crackled through the crowded terminal of Denver International Airport, calling passengers for Flight 227 to Seattle. Families gathered their bags, business travelers checked their watches, and in the middle of it all stood 12-year-old Carter, clutching a small blue backpack and a worn-out teddy bear named Milo. She was traveling alone for the first time, something she'd been both excited and terrified about for weeks. Her parents had divorced last year and now, every few months, flew to visit her dad in Washington. Her mom had insisted she'd be fine. "You're brave, sweetheart," she said that morning, kissing's forehead. "You've got this." Now, standing by gate 32, bravery felt harder to find. The airport smelled like coffee and jet fuel, and the sound of engines rumbling outside made her chest tighten. A gate agent wearing a navy vest smiled warmly as she crouched to level. "Are you our unaccompanied minor today?" she asked kindly. Nodded, holding out her boarding pass with trembling fingers. "Don't you worry, honey. We'll take good care of you. The crew knows you're coming." The woman pinned a laminated tag around her neck, "Unaccompanied minor," printed in bold letters, and guided her toward the jet bridge. Turned for one last wave. Her mother's eyes glistened behind a forced smile, mouthing the words, "I love you." Smiled back, then she stepped onto the long, narrow tunnel leading to the airplane. The 737 loomed ahead, sleek and silver beneath the bright airport lights. As she entered, a wave of warm, recycled air greeted her. A tall man in a pilot's cap stood by the cockpit door. "Hey there, young lady," he said with a grin. "Welcome aboard Flight 227, you must be." She nodded shyly. "I'm Captain," he continued. "We'll get you to Seattle safe and sound." Beside him, a friendly flight attendant named knelt down. Her hair was tied neatly in a bun, and her smile felt instantly reassuring. "Hi, I'll be checking on you during the flight. You like cookies?" Nodded. "Good," said. "I'll make sure you get extra." Led her to seat 14A, a window seat halfway down the aisle. The cabin smelled faintly of coffee and leather. Buckled her tightly and placed Milo beside her, facing the window as if he wanted to see the view too. Passengers trickled in one by one. An older couple, a businessman on his phone, a college student with headphones, a mother holding a baby. The hum of voices filled the cabin as luggage thudded into overhead bins. Gazed out at the bustling runway. Planes taxied like giant metal birds, their wings glinting in the afternoon sun. Her heartbeat quickened, not from fear but anticipation. Flying made her feel free, like she was escaping gravity itself. The intercom beeped. "Good afternoon, ladies and," Captain voice echoed calmly. "Welcome aboard Flight 227, non-stop to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Weather looks clear for most of the route with light winds over the Rockies. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." Engines whirred louder, vibrating through the floor. Palms pressed against the armrest as the plane began to taxi, moved down the aisle checking. "All buckled in, sweetheart?" "Yes, ma'am," replied, trying to sound grown-up. Winked. "Good girl, you're already a pro flyer." The jet turned onto the main runway. Outside, the horizon shimmered gold under the setting sun. The engines roared, pushing back into her seat. Her stomach dropped as the ground blurred beneath her. Then, with a smooth lift, Flight 227 broke free from the earth. Gasped softly, watching as the airport grew smaller and smaller below, tiny cars, tiny buildings, and her mother's world fading into distance. Clouds rolled by like cotton. For the first time that day, she smiled. Returned, kneeling by her seat. "Doing okay?" Nodded, eyes still glued to the window. "It's so pretty." "It always is up here," said warmly. "Nothing bad ever happens above the clouds." Those words hung gently in the air, innocent and comforting. Stood, unaware of how untrue they would soon become. As the sign clicked off and passengers relaxed, hugged Milo tight, unaware that this flight, so routine, so ordinary, was about to become the one the world would never forget. The clouds outside shimmered in pale gold as Flight 227 leveled at 33,000 feet. The turbulence from takeoff was gone, replaced by the steady hum of engines and the quiet murmur of relaxed passengers. Leaned her head against the window, tracing circles in the glass. Below, the Rocky Mountains looked like sleeping giants dusted in snow. Returned holding a small tray with cookies and a cup of orange juice. "Special delivery for my favorite flyer," she said with a grin. Smiled shyly, "Thank you." "You're doing great, sweetie," said, crouching beside her. "First time flying alone can feel scary, huh?" "A little," admitted, "but it's also kind of amazing." "That's the spirit," patted her shoulder gently. "You just sit tight, we'll be in Seattle before you know it." A businessman across the aisle chuckled at something on his tablet, while an elderly woman beside him knitted, humming softly. The mother with the baby was now asleep, her child nestled peacefully on her chest. Everything about the cabin felt safe, ordinary, like 100 flights before it. The intercom chimed again. "Good afternoon, folks. This is your captain speaking. We're cruising smoothly at 33,000 feet. Should have you on the ground about 20 minutes early. Sit back and enjoy the view." Passengers applauded softly, smiled at easy flight. Nodded, her nerves easing. She peeked at the digital screen on the seat in front of her. Altitude, 33,000, speed, 540, outside temperature, F. She giggled softly at the thought of that freezing air outside, thankful for the warmth of her blanket. She reached down and tucked Milo under her arm. For a while, she drifted in daydreams, thinking about her dad waiting at the airport, his goofy smile, and the hot chocolate he always brought her after flights. Then a faint shudder ran through the cabin floor. It was subtle, like someone had nudged the plane from below. Glanced around. No one seemed to notice. Was busy pouring coffee for a passenger in the next row. Another tremor came, slightly stronger this time. The overhead bins rattled softly. The businessman frowned and took off his headphones. Felt the air shift, heavy and unfamiliar. The captain's voice crackled over the speaker, calm but clipped. "Ladies and, we're experiencing a bit of turbulence over the Rockies. Please fasten your..." Signs flickered to life with soft dings. Passengers murmured, buckling up. Them tugging her belt tight across her lap. Outside, the once sunny clouds had turned dark and swollen. Forks of lightning flashed far in the distance. The plane trembled again, harder. His cheerful expression tightened as she steadied herself against a seat. "Everything okay?" asked quietly. Nodded, forcing a smile. "Just a little bump in the road, sweetheart." But when she turned, her eyes darted toward the cockpit. Minutes stretched long. The hum of the engines deepened into a low growl. Stomach fluttered again, not excitement this time, but unease. She looked outside and her breath caught. The clouds weren't soft and white anymore. They were dark, swirling, alive. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the wing, and for a split second she saw a faint trail of smoke curling from its edge. Then came a loud bang. A metallic clank reverberated through the cabin. Several passengers gasped. The plane jolted sideways, sending drinks tumbling from trays. His coffee pot shattered against the aisle. His heart pounded. She grabbed the armrest. "What was that?" she whispered. Didn't answer immediately. She pressed her intercom button. "Captain, we felt a..." The reply was static, then a sharp, tense voice, "All crew to positions." Froze for half a second, then forced another shaky smile. "Tight, don't move, okay?" Nodded, eyes wide. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The businessman muttered a curse. The baby started crying. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Outside, lightning struck again, so close that the entire cabin flashed white for an instant. The plane dropped suddenly, only a few feet but enough to lift everyone's stomachs into their throats. A woman screamed, braced herself on the... The captain's voice came again, firmer this time. Ladies, and please remain seated. We're adjusting course to avoid heavy turbulence. His tone was steady, but beneath it, heard something new, something that terrified her more than the noise outside. Fear. The engines roared louder, fighting the storm. The plane tilted, climbing higher into the black clouds. Wind howled outside, shaking the fuselage like a paper toy. Clutched Milo tight against her chest and stared out the window as lightning forked across the sky, closer now, blindingly bright. The world outside looked like a stormy ocean, swallowing the plane whole. And then beneath the thunder she heard it, the strange, sputtering cough of an engine struggling for breath. The sound came again, a sputtering, coughing roar that didn't belong to a healthy jet engine. Then came the jolt. Not a tremor this time, but a bone-deep slam that threw everyone forward. A sharp gasp swept through the cabin, followed by a chorus of screams. Orange juice exploded from its cup, splashing across her jeans. The plane tilted sharply left, sending trays and phones sliding down the aisle. His calm voice tried to cut through the chaos. Everyone, on, heads down, it's just turbulence. But even she didn't believe her own words. The sign flickered like a heartbeat, and oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling with a hiss. They dangled and swung wildly as the aircraft began to shake harder. The sound of rattling metal filled the air, like the sky itself was tearing apart. His fingers shook as she grabbed for her mask. Her hands fumbled, the straps tangling. She remembered what her mom had told her a dozen times before the trip. Put yours on first, sweetheart. Always yours first. She pulled it over her face, breathing in the faint rubber smell, her small chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. Her heart hammered like it was trying to break free. Outside the window, lightning split the night open. The wing was slick with rain, trembling violently. A moment later, a flash illuminated something terrifying, a burst of fire spitting from the left engine before it went dark. A deep, metallic groan shook the plane from nose to tail. Then came the captain's voice, strained, distorted by static. Brace, brace for impact. Every word made the air colder. Hands were shaking as she guided passengers into position. Heads down, stay down, she shouted. She turned toward, crawling on her knees down the aisle, her hair whipping around her face. Sweetheart, listen to me, keep your head low, arms over your head. Tried to obey, clutching Milo tight to her chest. Her seat shuddered beneath her. The plane began a steep, sickening descent. The roar of the wind outside was deafening now, a constant scream. Loose items whipped through the air, magazines, a phone, someone's jacket. A food cart broke loose and barreled down the aisle, smashing into seats before wedging sideways. Captain, we're losing altitude. The co-pilot's voice broke through the intercom, but the words faded into more static. The lights flickered once more, then went out completely. Darkness. Only the blue glow of lightning flashed through the windows now, painting terrified faces across the cabin. Someone was praying aloud. Someone else cried out for their child, squeezed her eyes shut, whispering, "Please, God, please make it stop." Then came a sudden, weightless silence. It lasted only 2 seconds, but it was the most terrifying quiet she'd ever heard. In that brief stillness, realized the plane wasn't shaking anymore, it was falling. The nose of the aircraft tilted forward sharply, and everything lifted, people, luggage, even's coffee pot, floating for a horrifying instant before gravity slammed them back down. Screams filled every inch of air. Outside, rain streaked across the windows like bullets. The mountains below loomed closer, their snowcaps flashing under lightning strikes. His ears popped painfully as the air pressure dropped. Her stomach twisted into knots. The oxygen mask tugged against her face as the cabin depressurized further, crawled back toward her, bracing against the seats for balance. "Look at me," shouted over the roar. "You're going to be okay, just keep that mask on, okay?" Nodded through tears. "Are we going to crash?" hesitated, her eyes wide and full of truth she couldn't speak. "We're going to fight it, okay? The pilots are doing everything they can." Then, as if to answer her, a violent explosion rocked the aircraft. The right engine screamed, sparks showering across the wing. The plane tilted again, spinning into a barrel roll. Passengers cried out, some prayed. Others sat in stunned silence, too scared to move, gripped the armrest until her fingers went white. The world outside spun, sky, mountains, clouds, snow, all blending together. The captain's voice came through again, shouting to the control tower. "Mayday, mayday, this is Flight 227. We've lost both engines. Repeat, both engines." Static swallowed his voice. Pressed herself against the seat beside, wrapping her arms around the terrified girl. "It's okay, baby. I've got you." Buried her face against shoulder. Her tears soaked through the uniform fabric. She wanted to scream, but her voice wouldn't come. The roar of wind filled her head until there was nothing else. Somewhere in the chaos, a small part of her mind clung to one thought: her mom's face, her dad waiting at the Seattle terminal, Milo in her arms. If she could just hold on, just a little longer. Then came the sound of metal snapping, and the cabin lurched once more. The plane dipped nose first, spiraling violently toward the dark earth below. The last thing heard before everything blurred into noise was a trembling whisper in her ear. "Don't let go," plane screamed as it twisted violently through the storm. Lightning split the black sky outside the windows, illuminating the cabin in harsh white flashes. Seats rattled violently. Overhead compartments ripped open, raining magazines, headphones, and water bottles onto screaming passengers. Clutched Milo to her chest, trying to stay low, ears ringing from the roar of wind and the plane's tortured metal frame. Pressed her arms against the trembling seat, bracing against the chaos. "Stay down! Don't move!" she shouted. Her voice quivered slightly, betraying her fear, but her grip on's hand gave the girl a tether to reality. The plane's nose dipped sharply, sending everything floating for an instant. Stomach lurched violently. She closed her eyes, willing the earth to stay far away. Around her, people were screaming, crying, praying, trying to protect themselves. One man gripped the seat in front of him until his knuckles were white, muttering fragments of forgotten prayers. Through the chaos, the captain's voice broke through static. "All crew, prepare for extreme maneuvering. We've lost hydraulic control." The words barely made sense to, but the fear in them was unmistakable. She squeezed hand. The flight attendants were struggling to stay upright, but they didn't abandon the passengers. Crawled down the aisle, shielding as best she could, bracing herself against a seat as the cabin tilted sharply left, then right, like a boat in a stormy sea. Outside, the mountains loomed closer, jagged and terrifying. Snow whipped across the fuselage, lightning illuminating frozen cliffs in an eerie glow. The engines sputtered and screamed, struggling to maintain thrust. Sparks danced along the left wingtip, pressed herself against the seat, heart hammering. She could hear the metal twisting, groaning like it might tear apart at any second. The plane suddenly dropped hundreds of feet in seconds, sending passengers into a terrifying, weightless moment. Screams tore through the cabin, mingling with the roar of engines and the crash of loose luggage. A tray table hit a woman in the shoulder. A laptop flew across the aisle. Her mind struggled to process the chaos, but her body moved on instinct, clutching Milo tightly and bracing against the shaking seat. "Look at me," shouted above the storm. "Stay with me, don't panic." Opened one eye. His face was streaked with sweat and soot, hair plastered to her forehead. Despite the terrors, determination radiated through her, giving the smallest anchor of courage. She nodded, swallowing back a scream. The plane rolled violently again. The right engine sputtered, then caught in a flash of fire. Alarms blared across the cockpit. Outside, lightning struck dangerously close, illuminating the terrifying spiral of clouds that seemed to reach down and drag the plane into the storm. His fingers tightened around the armrest. Her breaths came fast, shallow, and icy. Each second stretched unbearably, each second threatening to be her last. Passengers were pinned to their seats by gravity's sudden betrayal. The smell of smoke began to drift through the cabin. In the cockpit, Captain fought the controls like a man battling against nature itself. His co-pilot shouted instructions, voice cracking. "Hydraulics are gone. Manual override." Sparks flew across the panels as he wrestled the yoke, trying to stop the descent. Every tilt of the plane threatened disaster. Crawled back to side again. "We're going to make it," she said fiercely, more to convince herself than the girl. "Just hold on, hold on." Gripped Milo, her small body pressed against. The plane twisted, dropped, spiraled, then leveled slightly before the cycle repeated. Outside, the mountains were no longer distant. They were a looming, jagged promise of collision. And then above the screaming, above the flashing lightning and chaos, realized something extraordinary. Despite the terror, his hand in hers, the creaking metal, the roaring engines, there was still a thread of hope. Somehow, if they held on, they might survive. Her fingers clenched. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She had to be brave. She had to hold on. The plane groaned, the engines faltered again, and Flight 227 continued its violent, spiraling descent toward the dark mountains below. The roar of the engines turned into a deafening, metal-racking scream. Flight 227 pitched violently as it tore through the storm, plunging toward the jagged Rockies. Felt her stomach leave her body entirely as the plane tipped nose first. Around her, passengers screamed in terror, gripping whatever they could, praying that the next second wouldn't be their last. Then the inevitable happened. The plane's left wing clipped the tops of trees, metal scraping against trunks. The fuselage buckled, screeching, bending, shuddering. The 737 became a living nightmare of fire, smoke, and twisted steel. Was thrown forward, hitting her shoulder against the seat in front. Milo flew across the aisle. Her breath came in shallow gasps. Pain shot through her leg, but she barely noticed. Her body was driven by pure survival instinct. She reached for her teddy bear and pressed it to her chest. Crawled toward her through the chaos, soot on her uniform, hair plastered to her sweat-streaked face. "Keep moving, stay with me," she shouted. The cabin erupted with screams as fire began licking the left wing. Smoke filled the air, stinging lungs and eyes. Passengers crawled over one another, desperate to escape. Ears rang from the chaos, from the metal shrieking and the roar of wind through broken fuselage windows. She spotted a small girl trapped under a broken seat across the aisle. Without thinking, dove forward, ignoring the sharp edges and shards of glass. "Hold on," she yelled, her voice trembling but firm. Using every ounce of strength, she helped lift the seat just enough for the girl to crawl free. Reached and grabbed her arm. "Come on, sweetie, out the window, follow me." They navigated the twisted wreckage, dodging burning debris. The snow from the mountainside had started falling inside the broken fuselage, melting against hot metal and forming steam that blurred vision. His leg throbbed violently, but she kept moving, focusing on Milo and the path pointed out. Outside, the world was chaos. Trees had been flattened. Smoke and flames marked the wing's path across the hillside. The mountain air was bitterly cold, and snowflakes whipped past like shards of glass. Stumbled, catching herself against the fuselage. She helped the elderly couple beside her stand, even as the fire crept closer to the broken plane. "Keep going, don't stop," shouted. Her face was streaked with soot and tears, but her voice was firm. Turned to check the aisle. People were still inside, some frozen in shock, others too injured to move. She glanced down at her small hands and realized something. She could help them. Maybe she had to. She crawled back inside the plane, moving carefully through smoke and debris. Her tiny frame allowed her to squeeze past bent metal and overturned seats. One by one, she helped pull passengers free. A mother with a baby, a man pinned by a tray table, a teenage girl crying in fear. By the time the local rescue teams arrived, they found on the snow-covered hillside clutching Milo, soot covering her hair and clothes. She was trembling, exhausted, but alive. Beside her held the hands of those had helped free, nodding at the brave little girl. Rescue personnel couldn't believe it. A 12-year-old child had crawled back into a burning, spiraling wreck to pull passengers to safety. Sat quietly on the snow, breathing heavily, looking at the twisted remains of Flight 227. The roar of the engines was gone. All that remained was smoke, ice, fire, and the eerie silence of survival. Somewhere far below, snow continued to fall over the Rockies, blanketing the mountainside. And amidst the wreckage, Carter, small, terrified, and yet unshakably brave, sat clutching her teddy bear, the first of countless heroes on that flight. She had survived, and she had saved lives. The flames licked hungrily along the twisted wing of Flight 227, smoke curling upward in black ribbons that blurred the mountain air. The wind carried the bitter scent of jet fuel and burnt metal. Every second felt like an eternity, every breath a struggle. And yet, Carter moved. Her small body crawled through the wreckage, soot streaked across her face, Milo clutched tightly in one arm. She ignored the pain shooting up her leg from a twisted ankle. Each movement was purposeful, driven by the desperate instinct to save others. She could hear groans and cries from inside the cabin and refused to look away. Limping beside her, grabbed an elderly man pinned under a section of the seat. "Help me," she shouted. Nodded, teeth clenched. Together they lifted the metal enough for him to wriggle free. He fell to the snow, coughing, grateful and trembling. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. But there was no time to rest. Behind them, a small fire spread along the fuselage. Smoke stung eyes, making tears mix with soot. Her hands were scraped and bleeding, but she pressed on, pulling a teenage girl free from under a collapsed tray table. "Come on," she urged, guiding her toward the exit. The plane groaned ominously. Every creak and snap of metal reminded them how fragile the world had become. One wrong move could collapse the cabin further, could ignite the fuel, could end everything. But refused to stop. She had a mission. People were depending on her. Another scream rose from the middle of the plane. A mother and her toddler were trapped beneath a fallen overhead bin. Crawled toward them, soot burning her lungs, snow melting into the cabin and forming slippery puddles beneath her knees. "Hold on, I'm coming," she yelled. Using every ounce of strength, she lifted the bin long enough for the mother to grab her child and crawl free, helped them outside, guiding them down the snowy slope to safety. Paused for a moment, chest heaving, heart pounding. Around her the wreckage smoked, groaned, and threatened to collapse entirely. But she couldn't stop. Not yet. A small group of survivors was trapped near the rear of the cabin, crawled back inside, ignoring the pain, ignoring the fear. She was a 12-year-old girl, but in this moment she was stronger than she had ever imagined. She pulled at twisted metal, soot covering her arms, hair plastered to her forehead. One by one, she freed the terrified passengers, guiding them too, who shepherded them down the mountainside. Somehow the fire never reached them. Somehow the rescue helicopters had not yet arrived. Somehow remained calm, focused, and determined. By the time the first rescuers reached them, was sitting on the snow, exhausted, covered in soot and frost. She held Milo tightly, watching guide the last of the survivors into safety. Paramedics rushed past, assessing injuries, carrying blankets, and offering water, but didn't move. She barely noticed the chaos around her. A rescue worker knelt beside her, wide-eyed. You went back in there?" he asked, voice full of disbelief. Nodded slowly. I had to," she whispered. Her voice trembled, but there was no fear left, only relief that everyone had survived. Knelt beside her, brushing soot from her cheeks. "You're the bravest kid I've ever met," she said, her voice breaking. "You saved lives today, you saved lives." Looked out at the mountainside, at the twisted wreck of Flight 227, at the small group of survivors huddled in blankets. She shivered, not from cold but from adrenaline. She had faced fire, metal, and death, and had survived. She had done more than survive. She had become a hero. And the world would never forget the courage of a 12-year-old girl who refused to let anyone die on Flight 227. The snow fell gently over the jagged wreckage of Flight 227, blanketing the mountainside in white, softening the horror of what had happened hours earlier. Smoke curled lazily from the burned fuselage, now a skeletal reminder of the 737 that had spiraled from the sky. Sat on the ground, soot and snow covering her hair and clothes, Milo clutched to her chest, knelt beside her, wiping the girl's face with a blanket. Around them, survivors huddled in shock, blankets wrapped tightly around trembling shoulders. Some cried. Others stared silently, unable to comprehend the chaos they had just endured. Emergency crews moved methodically, guiding passengers to safety, checking vitals, and transporting the injured to waiting helicopters and ambulances. Watched, exhausted, as paramedics carried a young woman who had fractured her leg and a man bleeding from a head wound. Every life saved was a miracle, and felt an overwhelming mix of relief and disbelief. "You went back in there?" one of the rescue workers asked, kneeling to meet her gaze. His eyes were wide with shock. Nodded slowly, voice small but unwavering. I had to help them," she said. Her hands trembled, but she held Milo tightly, her anchor amid the chaos. Smiled, though her own eyes glistened with tears. "You saved lives today. Every single person you helped look around. They're alive because of you." A local reporter from a news crew approached, microphone in hand. Cameras flashed. His first instinct was to shrink back, to hide behind. But the rescuers insisted, and slowly she nodded, realizing the world needed to hear what had happened. Across the nation, headlines would soon proclaim the courage of a 12-year-old girl. "Child hero saves passengers on Flight 227, read one. 12-year-old Carter becomes face of survival, read another. Yet didn't care about the fame or attention. She cared about the people she had saved, the strangers she had pulled from fire and debris, and the knowledge that despite chaos, bravery could still exist in the smallest of packages." The survivors began telling their stories to one another, embracing and crying together. Many whispered thanks too, gratitude shining in tear-filled eyes. She offered shy smiles, though her body ached and her chest heaved from exhaustion, wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You know," said softly, "you're going to remember this for the rest of your life, and someday people will tell your story for you." Nodded, watching the sunset reflect off the mountains, the blood-orange light glinting against the snow and smoke. For the first time since the crash, she felt safe. At the makeshift triage area, a pilot from another flight approached, holding a small notebook. "Captain asked me to tell you, he said you were incredible. You helped save more lives than he ever imagined possible. He's proud of you." Hugged Milo. She wanted to believe she had been brave, but it still felt surreal. Just hours ago, she had been a terrified child, staring at the sky, hopping to survive. Now she was a hero, recognized and celebrated across the country. The television crews filmed interviews as helicopters took off into the snowy evening. His mother finally arrived, rushing to her daughter's side, tears streaming down her face. They embraced tightly. "I knew you were brave," whispered. "But this is more than I could ever imagine." His gaze drifted back to the mountainside, to the twisted metal of Flight 227. The plane had fallen, but life had not. In that moment, understood something profound. Courage isn't about size, age, or experience. It's about choosing to act when others cannot, and holding on even when the world seems determined to let go. And for 12-year-old Carter, the courage of a lifetime had been found in the fire, smoke, and chaos of Flight 227. 15 years had passed since the terrifying ordeal of Flight 227. The Rockies were calm once again, dusted with soft snow that reflected the late afternoon sun. The memory of that day had never faded, but time had shaped it into something powerful, a reminder of courage, resilience, and the unshakable will to survive. Carter adjusted the cap of her pilot's uniform, staring at the sleek silver waiting at Gate 32 in Denver. The irony wasn't lost on her. This was the same airport, the same gate, and now, for the first time, she was the one commanding the aircraft. She had dreamed of flying ever since the turbulence of that fateful day, and now, at 27, she had achieved it. Her fingers traced the edge of the controls, feeling the familiar smoothness under her palms. The cabin smelled of coffee and new leather, the same scent that had once greeted her as a terrified 12-year-old. She had remembered it vividly, and it now felt comforting rather than intimidating. "First Officer Carter, ready for pre-flight check," came the voice of her co-pilot, a cheerful young man who didn't yet know the history behind this flight. Smiled, adjusting her headset. "Ready," she replied, voice calm but carrying the quiet strength she had developed over years of training and experience. As the boarding announcement echoed through the terminal, his mind drifted briefly back to that night. The roar of engines, the chaos, the flames, the smoke, the terrified faces of the passengers, each memory vivid, alive, and formative. And's courage and steady hand had stayed with her all these years, guiding her own instinct to act decisively under pressure. Her fingers brushed over a small bracelet on her wrist's gift, given to after the rescue, a symbol of bravery, mentorship, and the bond forged under fire. "We made it," she whispered quietly, a smile tugging at her lips. The passengers boarded quietly, unaware of the story behind their pilot. Some chatted casually, others buried themselves in phones or books. Observed them, a calm reassurance settling over her. She understood their fear, though they didn't yet know it. She knew exactly how it felt to look at the sky and feel both awe and terror, to clutch a small toy for comfort, to hope against hope that survival was possible. "Fastened?" she asked her co-pilot. "Checked and secure," he replied. Glanced out the window one last time at the snow-dusted runway and the fatting mountains beyond. She remembered the fear, yes, but also the courage, the compassion, the instinct to act, and the knowledge that even in the worst chaos, hope could prevail. Engines roared to life and Flight 418 began to taxi down the runway. His heart lifted, not in fear this time, but in triumph. The plane lifted smoothly into the clear sky, leaving the earth behind. She felt the familiar flutter in her stomach, the thrill of flight, and the undeniable truth. She had conquered not just the sky, but herself. As the jet climbed above the clouds, allowed herself a small, private smile. She thought of the passengers she had saved, of the child she had once been. The sky stretched endlessly before her, calm and infinite. And in that vast expanse, knew she was no longer just a survivor of Flight 227. She was a pilot, a leader, a hero in her own right. She had transformed fear into strength, chaos into courage, and tragedy into purpose. She glanced down at her lap, Milo tucked safely into a small keepsake bag beside her controls. A small reminder of the child she had been and the hero she had become. "Seattle-Tacoma in 2 hours, the co-pilot announced. Nodded, eyes bright with determination and peace. She leaned back slightly, taking a deep breath, letting the hum of the engine soothe her. The sky stretched endlessly ahead, calm, welcoming, and hers to command. And for Carter, the girl who had once clutched a teddy bear and prayed for survival, the sky had finally become a place of triumph, freedom, and fulfillment. She had survived Flight 227. She had saved lives. And now she was exactly where she was meant to be, soaring, unafraid, and unstoppable.